What's the deepest question you can possibly ask? This itself is a question which has the potential to overturn the way you see all of reality. Its answer could help you find clarity within other questions which appear scientifically unanswerable. And the answer to this deepest question cannot be the work of mere mortal minds. Its answer must be determined by the architecture of reality itself. If you want to hear more, join me on this quest for the fundamental question. Let's get started. So what really is the deepest question? One might suggest something of grave consequence, like, are we alone in the universe? Or something about the cosmos itself, like, what is beyond the edge of the universe? Or something philosophical, like what happens to us when we die. But refocus and think carefully. It seems valid to reason that the deepest question would be so deep that all other questions we could ever ask would be derivative of it. You could argue that's definitionally true, even. The question would be such that a full and unmitigated answer to that question would provide access to all knowledge and wisdom in the universe. That would make sense, wouldn't it? For the deepest question? So the question needs to be vast and all-encompassing, somehow. How about, where did the universe come from? Or, if there was a Big Bang, what happened before it? Or, is there a God? These questions are definitely pointing more in the right direction. The deepest question is going to be about the truest, deepest nature of reality. But each of these questions are different from one another. How do we know exactly which question to ask? Well, these questions differ from each other because each makes subtly different axiomatic assumptions about the nature of reality. Assumptions that the truly deepest question would not make, could not make, again by definition. It wouldn't be the deepest question if there was some assumption below it left unaddressed. To help you see the deepest question, I'd like you to notice something. Every explanation we could ever give for the origin of the physical universe reaches some level at which we must invoke the idea of eternity. Things, states, beings, concepts, which have no prior reason to exist. They simply are the way they are. Let's examine the following examples. Maybe there's a God. This is a possibility. We don't need to apply religious connotations to it. Let's merely say God is a thing that created the universe that isn't merely an unconscious force of nature. It's a conscious thing, something that purposely decided to create the universe we observe. If God is real, it would have to take the form of an omnipotent being. Now, within a presupposed God answer, one could contrive something less conventional than an omnipotent God, such as maybe our universe being a simulation within the supercomputer of some alien civilization in a higher plane of reality. And in such a situation, one could colloquially use the word God to describe the being that created the simulation of our universe, and that alien being is not necessarily omnipotent. That's true, but I remind you to think carefully. If some kind of simulation idea, or anything analogous to it, is the case, that just pushes the answer we really want back. If our universe is merely a blip within something much, much larger, an actual answer to our question, a question which is really about the origin of everything, means we need to know where this hypothetical higher order of reality came from too. Even if we live in a simulation within a simulation within a simulation millions of layers deep, if there is an ultimate layer, we must then ask where it came from. The ultimate origin is what we really care about. And if we are, in this case, assuming God is indeed the answer, the type of being that created this reality would have to be the all-powerful God kind of an answer. Yet, even being omnipotent, one could still ask where this God came from. This becomes an infinite regress problem. If God was itself created at some point, it would require another God to have created it, which itself requires another God to have created it, which requires another God, and so on. If that arrangement is true, then the cycle must go on for eternity. However, the usual answer to this is that God itself would simply be eternal. It would have always existed. Or it exists in some way which is outside of time. One could imagine time being a property of our universe, and a God existing outside the universe would simply exist timelessly, not requiring a creator of its own. God would simply be the temporal origin point of reality, which would at long last answer our question. Now that's one idea. Here's another. Maybe the moment of creation happened due to a natural process, rather than by design. This idea has a lot in common with the idea of an omnipotent God, but rather than the initial starting point of the universe being an eternal and all-powerful conscious entity, the idea would be that the creation of the universe was caused by something which is simply a natural, unthinking, unconscious process. One example is the idea of a multiverse. One could imagine the fact that our universe's laws of physics are tuned such that physical matter, galaxies, stars, planets, and ultimately life can exist, might be the result of there actually being an overwhelmingly, perhaps infinitely, large number of separate universes. If there are an infinite number of universes, with every possible configuration of physical laws and starting conditions, most universes would be uninhabitable, or would simply collapse in on themselves immediately. But maybe we exist as one of the small fraction of universes which happen to be configured in a way that's conducive for life. This idea holds appeal in the sense that it's simply a natural process, and doesn't require the assumed complexity of a conscious being such as a god to provide an explanation for the existence of reality. However, just as the notion of God has an infinite regress problem, so too does the multiverse. Where did the multiverse come from? A multiverse is a tremendously substantial thing. It would need to exist for some reason, presumably. Would it not also require a higher order multiverse to create it, and another to create that, and so on? A common answer is that the multiverse is also eternal, much like a god would be. It's simply the most foundational element of reality. In this scenario, the multiverse just is. It's an infinite and timeless realm of all possible universes. It always has been, and it always will be. You can see in both of these ideas that there's a point at which things just are the way they are. Either there's an infinite string of omnipotent gods creating one another because that's just how things are, or there's a single timeless god because that's just how things are, or there's an infinite network of nested multiverses because that's just how things are, or there's a single eternal multiverse because that's just how things are. None of these explanations have a reason for being the explanation that's true, but if we want an answer, if we really want the right answer, we must arrive at this point and ask, once again, why? Why would it be any particular way? The properties of each solution are distinct, so it's not as if we might realize these answers are all somehow secretly saying the same thing. They aren't. These answers are meaningfully, substantively different from one another. They have different properties. All these solutions seem roughly equally plausible. They're equally unfalsifiable. They're all omnipotent in one sense or another. And they're all eternal and fundamental, with, by definition, nothing prior having caused them to be the way they are. And yet the particular properties of each seem to demand the existence of something prior to have caused it to be that way. But that can't be the case. What would motivate the foundational nature of reality to have certain particular qualities? Nothing could have chosen its qualities, because nothing came before it. And if we decide something did come before it, it just pushes the answer one layer back. Now we have to ask the question again for this new fundamental object. Any answer we could possibly give becomes another layer in an infinite regress? If the answer to where the universe came from does happen to be God, why isn't it the multiverse? Or if the answer is the multiverse, why isn't it God? They both seem plausible, yet neither answer has anything prior to act on it, causing it to be either particular way. So how then could the answer be either one of them? How would reality decide, prior to time, prior to physical laws, prior to logic? How would it decide to have its fundamental nature operate in any particular way? It's not that there's a problem with any particular solution, it's that any solution that ends up being true would seem to be the truth arbitrarily. This is the fundamental problem of existence, as far as I see it. Gods and multiverses aren't the only possibilities either. Another naturalistic idea is perhaps there are no other universes, but maybe the Big Bang occurred, and before it there was nothing. No space, no time. There was just an instant of origin with nothing prior. But again, if this is true, what motivated reality to be that way? If there's no God and no multiverse, and the singularity billions of years ago leading to the universe we now exist within is just the fundamental nature of things, why? Why is that the fundamental nature of things? Why that? Why not a multiverse? Why not a God? The problem goes even deeper. Let's observe another example. What if the universe had no moment of creation? What if we live in an eternal universe, and it's always been here? You might think this circumnavigates the problem at first glance, but the problem persists. A temporally infinite reality is just one of the many ways things could be, and it's still that way for apparently no particular reason, beyond it just is that way. It's just, rather than asking about a creation story, in this case we're asking about the continual state of the universe. Either way, ultimately we're asking why anything is the way it is. We're asking about the fundamental nature of reality. We're asking why anything is at all. This is where we begin to touch the deepest question. You might say the question is, what motivates the laws of physics to be the way they happen to be? But distill it further. Why is reality the way it is, in regards to any of its properties? Any of its qualities whatsoever? Why is reality any particular way? Why does reality exist in the first place? Why does anything exist? Why existence? Why existence? This is the fundamental question. It's partly asking why things are the way they are, when one could imagine the universe being different from the way it is, but on the deepest level, it's asking why is there anything rather than nothing? This question feels so large and formless that it's impossible for us to answer. Its primordial immensity seems as though reckoning with it is just beyond mortal minds, yet there is an answer. And the answer is just as heartbreakingly simple as the question turned out to be. Notice the question of why does anything exist in the first place is equivalent to asking what can exist without prior cause. We just need to find what could be a valid answer for the question of what we could put in that position we tend to place gods and multiverses in. And though you might think nothing could ever actually fill that position, because nothing can exist without reason, you might be surprised to find there is an answer, and that in trying to deny it, you actually just answered it yourself. Nothing can exist without reason. Nothing. Nothing is the only thing that can exist without a prior cause. It does seem obvious in retrospect. Nothing almost feels like the default option. Somehow like the lowest energy states, like the thing that would just be the case self-evidently. The existence of anything at all seems absurd when you consider the fact that reality really should be entirely composed of nothingness, non-existence, because there doesn't seem to be a reason anything would exist to begin with. And yet here we are. Reality exists. By virtue of the fact you're undergoing a conscious experience of some kind or another, we know that some shape or form of reality does exist, unquestionably, and that therefore nothingness cannot be the full story. It can't be that nothing exists and that's it. If we know anything, we know that that can't be it. Allow me to define nothingness, as the term is not as straightforward as one might think. One might say a glass is empty, filled with nothing, but it's filled with something. Air molecules, photons, various types of radiation from outer space. It's permeated by space-time itself, and whatever else you might think of, quantum phenomena, and so on. True nothingness wouldn't have any of these. In fact, it would even be empty in much more abstract ways too. For conceptual clarity, I will hereafter refer to true nothingness as null. Null is the emptiest possible concept. It contains no space, nor time, no matter, nor energy, and nothing else of any kind. You might imagine it as suffocatingly small, or as a vast, dark, yawning chasm, but null is empty of concepts, such as large and small, light and dark. It has no room for anything. It has no concepts of any kind, not even enough conceptual space for the existence of logic itself. 1 + 1 doesn't even equal 2 within null, and null certainly could not exist in relationship to any other concept. You couldn't put null inside of a box, as then its spatial relationship with the box would prevent it from being null. Null has no properties. Null cannot be visualized. Null is the thing that exists prior to everything else. The first aspect, inevitable, unconscious, unthinking, formless, alone in the depths at the bottom of reality. That is null. You might imagine null as inert, and that's a good impulse to have. It's what I assumed of null when I was first experimenting with these ideas. Null has no properties, right? So you'd think it shouldn't be able to do anything. But that's not true. Null is not the inert object you might take it for. Firstly, if null is the inevitable primordial object, this must be true, self-evidently, as reality is clearly happening, so something else has to happen. Things are not as simple as null remaining stationary for eternity. It seems impossible, but I think there's a way to see how null does this. Null doesn't simply exist at the beginning of time, like the instant before the Big Bang. Remember, it has no relationship to anything, meaning if anything exists, null by definition cannot exist in relationship to it. Furthermore, notice that the rules of logic as we know them are defined by the architecture of the universe we exist within. That is to say, we could imagine a universe in which things are different, maybe so different they wouldn't even make sense to us. We could imagine a weird universe entirely packed with stone spheres, or a universe with no space-time but with something else we can't visualize. Modern computers are actually able to simulate virtual spaces with different geometries to our physical universe. They can literally have a different number of degrees in a circle, for example. So even things that seem fundamental, like geometry, or logical statements, like 2 + 2 = 4, are actually only figments of how our universe works specifically, and they wouldn't be present in null. Null then has no pathway to do anything, or become anything, or behave in any ways other than simply being itself. The only thing it can do is be itself, which is the thing it's doing by default, and null must be everything that it is. That last statement might have slipped by you because it sounds so innocuous, but it's absolutely crucial, so I'll say it again. Null must be everything that it is. What do I mean by that? Imagine a friend asks you to retrieve the box in the other room, and you walk into the other room to find 2 boxes. You wouldn't be able to distinguish the box your friend wants from the box your friend doesn't want, because the definition you have is simply the box in the other room. and you've been put in a situation where two items fit that description perfectly. Given the definition you have, the boxes are indistinguishable. Of course, in reality, the boxes have many real physical properties such as their location, what they contain, etc., and so they are actually different. However, if an object had only one quality, such as a one-dimensional point object, an object entirely described by a single number denoting its location along a number line, if you were to have multiple of them, you wouldn't be able to tell. They'd overlap. Having one of them or having a trillion of them would be the same thing. They're literally described with a single property, and that property isn't its quantity, so it almost doesn't even make sense to have more than one of them. So if the two objects have exactly, precisely, absolutely the same properties, they're actually not two objects, they're one object. They are the same object. In the case of null, if some other primordial object fits the same definition as null, that is to say, another primordial object is also nothing, it would have as much claim to existence by default as null does. Something definitionally indistinguishable from null would also have to exist, and it would be instantaneously generated by reality just like null. What then is the definition of null? Well, we've already said null is to be without properties. One can imagine other objects like this. Consider the opposite of null, the yin to null's yang, the infinity to null's infinitesimalness, the fullness to null's emptiness. For conceptual clarity, I'll refer to this other object as euon. Euon is a concept which contains everything simultaneously. It's impossible to visualize how unthinkably vast and all-encompassing euon is. As a matter of definition, everything that has, does, or ever will exist exists within euon. Our entire universe exists within euon. Every universe you could imagine exists within euon. Every universe you can't imagine exists within euon, and together these don't even come close to filling all that euon is. Euon is as much at the pinnacle, at the summit of reality, as null is at the bottom. My claim is euon is actually meaningfully identical to null. One might ask how something infinite can be indistinguishable from null. Consider a screen with white and black pixels. To display an image, the screen must have some white and some black. A totally black screen has no information encoded into it, but nor does a totally white screen. Just as null is so empty it can't actualize anything, euon is so full it can't actualize anything either. One might imagine euon as a block of marble, from which a sculptor could carve anything. A yet uncut block of stone has not been carved into any particular shape, but every sculpture it could ever be is already there, hidden beneath the surface, simultaneously superimposed atop of one another. Yet in being every sculpture simultaneously, the marble block is no sculpture at all. It takes no form. It actualizes no potential. Euon is the marble block, but it extends infinitely in every direction. And it isn't merely marble, it's every material, every quality, every possibility, in infinite number and throughout infinite dimensions with infinite variability, all overlapped and expressed simultaneously. By being everything, euon is effectively nothing. It's another solution to the self-genesis riddle. Our discovery of null before euon is merely an effect of how the story must be told for a human mind to understand it. But euon truly has as much claim to self-genesis as null. They're both different expressions of the same thing, each utterly opposite yet totally identical, like two sides of a coin. Yet, one last insight reveals the deepest truth this model can offer. It's sort of like these two primal aspects are essentially the same object, viewed from different vantage points. It's as though we're in a realm of primordial objects that has no predefined logic other than that which is defined by and contained within the primordial objects themselves. And a sharp border between the two might constitute such a logical addition. It seems to make more sense to reason that no such border exists, and that null and muon are less like the two sides of a coin and more like the north and south poles of a great sphere. This is how we realize null and muon are not alone. They merely form the tiniest and most extreme ends of a continuum of every possible primordial object between the one and the other. Null and muon are two different interpretations of the same thing, something much, much larger than null or muon are individually. Considered fully, all the contents of this realm, including null, muon, and the colossal unseen tapestry between, forms the totality of everything with every possible property. It's as though this object isolates every quality of muon and expresses them one at a time, each as its own independent primordial object, and every combination of each quality too. Infinite in number and inconceivable in their variability, everything that could possibly exist exists here, and not merely overlapped and unrealized as things are within muon, but individuated, made real. The entirety of the continuum must come into being with the self-genesis of null and muon. This object, in its entirety, is what I call the fundament, because it is the fundamental base of all reality. So, with dawning inevitability comes null, and from null's reflection comes muon, and from their necessary continuum emerges the full immensity of the fundament, containing every reality that could possibly exist. As for what a reality actually is, that's probably a question for another time. The deepest question is, why existence? And it seems we might have found an answer, because existence is inevitable. Thank you once again for watching. Please leave a like on the video, share it around if you can, and subscribe to my channel. I hugely appreciate you taking the time to listen, and every bit of engagement helps me massively. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.